Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 9 of Two Girls, One Crime. I'm Emily,
I am Megan.
and today we're going to be talking about the Cleveland Torso Murderer, which is one that we haven't really learned a lot about, so we thought that this would be interesting to talk more about and dive a little bit deeper. We're still in our separate areas, and it's so sad.
It's really depressing. It makes me want to murder myself, but here we are.
What a way
Um,
to start the
what a way
episode.
to start an episode. But it's okay because crime connects us from all parts of the country, no matter where
So
we
true.
are.
So true. That could be our motto. So yeah, we're talking about, well, maybe it should be our motto. So yeah, we're talking about the Cleveland Torso Murderer, and let's get into it a little bit. So this is another one where the actual serial killer is unidentified still. So we're going to kind of be talking about some more like hypotheticals and kind of all that we know so far. So a little background is that he, well, we're assuming it's a he. Do we know it's a he?
We are assuming based on the evidence that
Yeah.
it is a he, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah. So, this unidentified serial killer killed people in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. Um, all of these killings involved dismembering people's bodies. 13 of them, which we know of for sure, but we think at least 20 people. And they were disposed in a place called Kingsbury Run in Ohio, also. And this place is kind of known for like bars and gambling, and there's brothels there. So, this is where this person decided to leave these bodies, probably because they wouldn't be found a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a ton of investigations on these murders, and this was particularly led by someone in the FBI, Elliot Ness, I believe. But again, nobody was apprehended or caught for these murders. And this happened so long ago, like we said, in the 1930s, plus obviously a few years. But in 2024, a medical examiner from a nearby county and this project called the DNA Doe Project teamed up to try to like figure out who some of these unidentified victims were. Many
Mm-hmm.
were not found, but a lot were identified, which I think is really nice for those families just to kind of like get some closure if they're still alive today. Um, so yeah, but again, we don't really know who this is. So Megan's going to get into a bit more about the actual crimes themselves and kind of what happened and all of that.
And like again, kind of what Emily said, a lot of this is the victims at the time, and a lot of it now were unidentified. And I believe out of the victims that were, or the bodies that were found, only two or three were identified in terms of like names, connections, and still nothing was found. But starting off with September of 1934, a young man found the remains of a 30-year-old woman. The torso and thighs were attached, but there was amputation at the knees that washed up on the shores of Lake Erie. There was a note, and then I don't know how many bodies this is connected to, but it continues that there was a chemical preservative on the skin that turned it red, tough, and like a leathery kind of sensation. The head was never found of this victim, which unfortunately made it so police at the time were unable to identify who this was, and this became like the first official murder victim zero is kind of what they call it, and they named this individual the Lady of the Lake. Um, so about a year later, nothing happened for a year until September of 1935. Two boys found a decapitated corpse of a white male at the base of Jackass Hill, which runs into Kingsbury Run. The body was naked, shaved. There were a pair of socks that were cleaned and drained of blood. There were rope burns around the wrists. The cause of death was again determined to be decapitation. And then in that same month, a second body was found of a 40-year-old man with the same preservative on the skin. So that's how they started to kind of have these connections in there. Um, and again, two different ages. So we continue on to January 1936. Florence Pillio, if I'm saying that correctly, was this victim's name. Woman's body parts were neatly wrapped in newspaper and packed in two half bushel baskets. They were found by a building in the same area. Everything else was there besides the head again. Um, Kind of that same thing. Killer was keeping the head to be unable to identify the victim, but they did due to fingerprints. And they found that the cause of death wasn't necessarily decapitation, but the killer waited until rigor mortis in order to decapitate the head, um, which again, not great, but it does show that there was this like intelligence in there of knowing what to do.
Mm-hmm.
June 1936, two boys found a head wrapped in a pair of trousers. The next day, police found body parts. They found that it was clean and drained of blood. Corpse was intact except for the head. Death caused by decapitation. And there was never an identification placed on this victim. We
Mm-hmm.
keep going. July 1936, teen girl came across a 40-year-old white male, decapitated remains, never identified, and at this point we're up to 5 victims. So it's been
Mm-hmm.
a little over a year, I believe, since the very first
Mm-hmm.
murder, and there's five, or a little over a year, a little under a year.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And they're
then
all
we
the same.
They're all the same.
Decapitation.
But there's no consistency in terms of like race. There's no consistency in
Right.
terms of age. It's just they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Which this
Which
kind of
that actually is really interesting to me because usually a lot of serial killers, it's like they attack the same group of people and
mm-hmm,
also the same like method of murder. Um, but like in this case, it's like it's really not the same group of people. Like I
mm-hmm.
do wonder, like, were they random people? Like, is it someone that they've run into before? But that is interesting to me that it's like one of the two that are normally taken
Mm-hmm.
into consideration.
Yeah, and there's part of that is in our frequently asked questions section because people also wonder the same thing with that. But as of right now, the police are kind of just like all these people from maybe a similar area is the only way to really connect to them are being murdered.
Yeah.
So we continue on to September of 1936. So a year since the first official victim was found, a man tripped over an upper half of a man's torso. Late 20s, cause of death, again, decapitation. And this, at this point, indicated to police that there was a strong, confident killer who knew human anatomy because this
Yeah.
particular victim, it was like a clean swipe with whatever materials they used,
Mm-hmm.
and this victim was never identified.
Yeah.
Then we move to fall of 1936. There were 6 killings in one year, still no suspects, and they named this kind of like the Mad Butcher, um, is what the community was calling it, and there was a lot of fear that was around during that time. Then we
Mm-hmm.
move to February.
Valid.
Yeah, valid, honestly. I'd be mortified.
Yeah.
Um, then we move to February 1936. Man found an upper half of a woman's torso washed up on the shore. Cause of death had not been decapitation. With this particular woman, they were in their mid 20s. They were never identified, but they knew that the cause of death was not decapitation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I believe again, since they didn't have the head, they didn't have other body parts. There wasn't as much of an ability to kind of figure out like what happened. Um, June of 1937, a teen boy found a human skull under the bridge, and it was a part of an individual who was later identified as Rose Wallace, and that's an important one to keep in mind, who was a petite black woman about 40 years old. Um, then we move on to July 1937. There was a body in the recovered um, in the river with everything except the head. They found from this particular victim that the abdomen was gutted and the heart was ripped out. This individual was in their mid to late 30s. Again, never identified. Um, this next one, these next couple is where it starts to, if you will, slow down, and it starts to be a little more interesting. So, April 1938, a lower half of a woman's leg, and this is the 10th victim at this point, was found. And about a month later, there were two burlap bags found in which there was the torso and most of the rest of the legs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in this individual, it was interesting because there were drugs detected within kind of, and I don't know how exactly they did it, but in the skin. And it was hard though to identify if this individual was addicted to drugs or if the killer had used drugs to immobilize the victim because the arms were never found and they were unable to identify like how the drug was getting in the system. So they don't really know if there was a connection here. The only way there was a true kind of connection of like whether or not this individual was involved is because again there was that um, decapitation aspect. Um, so this one was kind of the turning point of Elliot Ness, who again, like Em said, was the head honcho of like figuring out what happened to these people. So there was a torso of a woman wrapped in man's double-breasted blue blazer and then wrapped again in an old quilt that was found. Legs and arms discovered in a recently constructed like makeshift box, and wrapped in a brown butcher paper and held together with rubber bands. So that was found. It looked like some of the parts were refrigerated. They didn't know for sure, but there was some of that indication within the remains. And then about like the day later, as they were investigating this, they found a second body that was like yards away. Both of the victims were never identified. But what was interesting about this one is because the two bodies were found in plain view of Elliot Ness's office. So you could see it from where the remains were found, and this was kind of looked at as the killer was taunting him, kind of being like, here's two more, you haven't found me yet.
Yeah.
At this point, Elliot Ness was not happy. He was very angry, under a lot of ridicule at the time due to not only the city fearing its safety, but also you have multiple people who are being killed and their remains are never identified either, so it just makes it even scarier. So him
And
and
being
30
left like in plain sight.
mhm
Like not even, well, yes to him, but also just like in the community, which is
mhm
horrifying.
it's very scary. So he was kind of fed up, and at the time, a lot of people did not like the way Elliot Ness did things because he was much more of like a aggressive or aggravator. I don't know what the correct verbiage would be there. But him on August 18th of 1938 at 12:40 in the morning, Elliot Ness and 35 officers raided like homeless encampments in Kingsbury Run in order to try to find the killer and find anybody who might have had a connection. It ended up being this whole big thing where some people just died due to the raid, some people were arrested and there was no connection, and a lot of people in the community did not think that this was necessarily helpful in any way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
And that's when we kind of go into our two suspects, or when things started to be identified, and that's in July of 1939. And I know Em did a lot more research on this, but this is when things kind of maybe started to look like the end was near, but there was really never a conclusion.
Yeah. So um, there were like over 9,000 people that were investigated. Like Megan said, like tons of people who lived in Kingsbury Run, tons of people just in the Cleveland area. Um, so over 9,000 people were investigated. Only two were like main suspects. So one of them is Frank Dolezal.
Hmm.
Don't know how to say that. Um, he was 52 years old, and he was originally, or he was also a Cleveland resident who lived with that man, Polillo, Flo something.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about him earlier. He was one who was killed. And he had connections to two other of the victims in these cases. So he was arrested in the murder of Polillo. I don't know how to say it.
It's Flo Polillo.
Okay, yeah. So he was arrested as a suspect in Polillo's murder. He also like originally confessed to it, but also retracted it, which we'll talk more about in a second. Um, so his Megan talked a little bit about this part in her research, but his confession was kind of like not very good. Not very good. It was like sort of like incoherent, sort of very good details. So it was kind of like it was very weird, and he ended up retracting it, like I said. He was unfortunately found in his jail cell, which they ruled by suicide. But a lot think that maybe he was actually murdered and not by suicide. So it looked like he had, the medical examiner saw that he had 6 broken ribs. Um, so that kind of seems odd with a suicide, but again, we don't really know. And he ended up being exonerated in the end. But that is very interesting because if he was murdered, like, who knows something in jail that got him murdered, like, oh, that's like where my mind goes. I'm like, I need to know all of the information, which is why these unknown ones are hard. um,
Yeah, I
so there
feel
was
like also it's like if right, like it is the 1930s or 1940s, so it's not like today with prison systems where we have all these cameras, like constant guards, like it's a little bit different. So like obviously maybe somebody knew enough to where somebody could get in there and harm
right,
him, or
right,
maybe a guard had a connection, like who knows
yeah,
realistically like what happened.
yeah. So that one's like kind of sad, but he, like I said, he ended up being exonerated from any involvement with any of
Hmm.
them. The next one is named Francis Sweeney. He was a World War II veteran who was part of like the medical unit. So he like knows a lot about the medical field, which I thought was interesting when we were talking about that, like precision of some of the
Hmm.
decapitations. Um, he was injured in the field from like a gas attack, which is why he was not still um, in the war.
Hmm.
He kind of became an alcoholic from his wartime experiences. He had a lot of PTSD. He was interviewed by Elliot Ness and all of the investigators. He Before the first interrogation, he was found in his hotel room, super intoxicated, and he ended up having to stay there for 3 days to get sober. Um, which shows how drunk he was if it took him 3 days to get sober. So
Hmm.
they ended up obviously not investigating him as he was intoxicated. They waited till he was sober. He also took some polygraph tests and he failed both of them. And the guy who actually administered the test told investigators that he thought that Francis Sweeney was probably the culprit, which I also think is like super interesting that
Hmm.
you're like, you can see these answers and he obviously failed it. Um, he ended up putting himself into an institution to like get better with his, I'm assuming, mental health, but also his drinking. He ended up dying a couple years later, and after he went into the facility, the killing stopped, which
Yeah,
is
and I
also like very crazy.
hmm and I feel like not just like, oh, it stopped like a couple months, like immediately. There was
It was
nothing
immediate.
else after he went into this mental institution to get help.
Yeah. So this makes me kind of think this may be the guy. But again, like, we really don't know, and so many people are probably out there who were investigated and also, could be looking like good suspects, but
Well, it
I don't
just
know.
there's so many connections though here where it's
Yeah,
like, okay, he's a part of the medical unit, so it's like he obviously needed to know at least a little bit about the human body. But it's like, okay, if you look at it, well then what is he doing with the heads? Like where did he put them? Like
I
did
know.
he did he actually with this out this struggle with addiction where it's like, well, was part of it like you're also killing all these people and like that's why you're drinking more? Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just there are some weird things.
And like, how have the heads not been found?
That's what I'm saying.
It's
It's
not
like,
like the ocean. Like, Cleveland obviously is not on the ocean, but like a lake is not, like, eventually I feel like stuff would be coming up in a lake where it's like, it's
well,
not the
and then
ocean where it's pushed out to like Europe or whatever.
yeah, well, even there were some things where like there was a torso of a woman that was found, and it was just a torso, and then a couple months later, like the legs showed up. So it's like
Hmm.
things were showing up too. But did he like bury the heads? Because he was like, well, I don't
Right.
want them to show up. But that's so much. Also, we're in Cleveland. It's not
I
like
know.
you're
I
in
know.
like
Rural
yeah,
Nebraska or
rural
whatever. Yeah.
Nebraska where no one could ever catch you. It's like you're in a city. Like, what are you doing to transport this stuff? Like, how are you
Right.
committing these crimes? And it's like nobody around you knows anything.
Hmm. I know. And I do find it like you were saying about kind of the whole like drinking thing, like, are you continuing to drink because you're doing these bad things, or are you not even realize that you're doing some of these
Mm-hmm.
things because you're drinking? And I feel like this guy, especially with like PTSD and coming back from the war, like, and then becoming an alcoholic, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like, who knows if like any of these people said something to him, were they just in the like wrong place wrong time, like, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I am very curious as to how, where are the heads? And like, I get like the head and the face and teeth are like a really big thing in identifying people, but like, obviously he used all these like things to like preserve the bodies, but like there's fingerprints. Like, again, this
That's
was
true. Well,
years
even
ago,
but
but
even like okay, the bags, for example, like the burlap bags, or it's like there's a men's blue blazer that's being wrapped in like you can at all figure out like where did it come from? Like what did
right.
it do? Like I know it's not now, but still you would expect like there to at least be some sort of identifier outside of just like these two people. And even Elliot Ness agreed. He like went to his death thinking that it was Sweeney. But of course nothing ever happened because he was found innocent. He didn't have anything to do with it, even though it
Hmm.
just seems like there's a lot of things that kind of add up in a
Yeah.
unknown way.
Yeah. It is. Ugh, I wish, we say this about literally every single one. I wish they like happened. Well, I don't wish that they happened more
Well,
recently because that sounds horrible. But like, technology wise, I wish they
yeah.
do, because I feel like a ton of these people would have been identified for like their family's sakes, but also the killer would have been identified. And again, the crimes did stop, obviously, so thankfully no more people got hurt or killed. But still, it's like, oh, I just want to know. I just want to know
Yeah.
who it is.
I just feel bad because I do think it is, well, of course, no matter who gets murdered, I'll feel bad, but I do think like it's also hard because a lot, like all the bodies that remained unidentified are buried in Ohio on like unmarked gravestones or whatever the deal
Hmm.
is there. And it's like, well, that could have been someone's mom, brother, but it's also like, it is strange too, where it's like, okay, none of these, let's say at least one of them has had to have a family member, right? Like nobody
Hmm.
ever came forward and was like,
I know.
my brother is missing.
Right. Or like, I don't know. I think a big thing is like birthmarks, or like, I don't know,
Yeah.
certain distinctive things on someone's body. So like, even without the head, like, I feel like you'd be able to identify your family members at least. But again, like,
Hmm.
who knows how long these people were either in the water or like, I don't know, like they said, like types of rigor mortis or and all of that. Like,
Yeah.
it's obviously hard to identify that. One, when someone's been dead for a certain amount of time, but also
Hmm.
like in the water. So I don't know, it's hard, but I feel like it is hard to imagine that nobody could identify any of their family members.
Yeah,
But
I
also,
feel
like,
like
again, who knows? And I think you're right. Like, there's a chance that, like, at least they all had at least one family member. So I don't know. It's like hard to. Oh, I
yeah,
just want to
this
know
one
who
is
did
very
it.
odd. It's very odd and there's no like real connection behind like like with Ted Bundy, right? He was crazy, but like they were all young females, where there's
Right.
obviously a fascination there. Ted
Hmm.
Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, first episode shout out, of course. But like it was all like young, minoritized,
Yeah.
like gay individuals, where there's this connection even here. It's like there's really no consistency in terms of like who these people were. Well, we also
Hmm.
don't know, right? Like on what they were. They could have
Yeah.
been whoever.
Yeah. Which is, ugh. I feel, ugh. I just keep having these thoughts where I'm like, I just want to know. But I also think it's like very interesting to then like compare it to cases now. If this were to happen now, like
Would be
there's just
caught
so
in like an
more
instant.
exactly. And like I don't know, I did see this one on TikTok, which we've talked about before, how like social media is like crazy, like especially in the like Gabby Petito case, like so many people were like online like trying to
Mhm.
figure stuff out. So I feel like this would be one that like would be really scary to see online, but also like I don't know, I think a lot of eyes are helpful. So I
Yeah.
do wish that there was some more information at least about it, but
No, I
we don't
100%
know.
agree.
I know. Um so yeah, we've kind of talked about some of these frequently asked questions already. But we're going to talk about them a little bit more before we say goodbye for this week. um, would you like to start us off?
Of course, darling.
Oh,
Um, okay, so were the killings ever solved? Like we said, no, the killer was never officially caught or identified. There were suspects out there, but they were never for sure found. A big reason why is there was a lack of physical evidence. Like we said, many of the victims lacked their heads, so kind of seeing like who they were, finding out connections there. So that was a huge part of it, and this prevented from more findings as well about like who these individuals were. So they were never officially solved. Um, did the killings stop? They did. The killings did stop. Fortunately, they did stop after there was a raid in the village again, or in the village in Kingsbury Run. There was a bunch of people that were rounded up. They were interviewed, obviously, but there was no connections. But there was also the killings stopped after going back to Sweeney after he was committed to a mental institution and passed away. There were no more killings after that.
yeah.
Um, which, so we don't necessarily know when it stopped or why it stopped, but we do know that it stopped during those two significant events, if that makes sense.
Yes, which seems like way too like what's the word? Like
Like wrapped up.
no, like it's too much of a coincidence that like all of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff happened at once and then it was done. Like
Mm-hmm.
that just seems like way too much of a coincidence.
Yeah, and I
Um,
feel like the thing here with this, it's like the one thing with the raid where it's like, okay, they raided these homeless camps pretty much, and it's like, why would a individual who was homeless be doing this? Like,
I know.
that one
Yeah,
makes no sense to me because it is like, well, they don't like they have other things that they're worrying about than like killing other people, and also it will make their lives probably worse.
I know. That's why like I am wondering about Sweeney and the alcohol like problems that he had because like I am so curious like if it was
Mm-hmm.
him, like I already said like probably 5 times. But like was he drinking to like forget about what was going on or was he
Yeah.
just drinking and like not even realizing? Um so in my opinion, I think it was him, but again, we don't know like a million of the other people who were
Mm-hmm.
investigated, so we won't know.
Yeah.
So the next question is like, was there commonalities in the victims? Um, there weren't a lot of commonalities, especially like race or gender, which again we don't know a lot about the victims. Um, but we do know that a lot were living in Kingsbury Run, which we said before was pretty impoverished, and some of them also were thought to be sex workers in that area. Like I said, there were a ton of brothels and bars and all of that. So that was thought to be some commonalities, but again,
Yeah.
like nothing like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy, like we talked about, within like the actual like about each victim.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
a
that's
big
kind of hard to think
I
about.
keep I keep yawning. Yeah. Sorry guys, if you hear my yawns, don't mind me. But anyways, a big part of it too is like since there weren't a lot of victims that were identified, they couldn't find commonalities amount around them. Um, so they more so went off of like they're all finding in these areas. Maybe the couple that were identified were impoverished, maybe a couple were engaging in like sex work of some kind, but there wasn't a lot to go off of. So this is kind of the most they were able to identify in terms of similarities.
Yeah, and that's like a fraction, like we were just
Hmm.
saying, of like all of the victims. So again, at least like a fraction of them were. Um, but it's hard to obviously know when you don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Um, so the last question that we kind of have to wrap it up is like, why were so many of the victims unable to be identified? Which we've talked about a ton of times. This killer took the heads, which like as people probably know, like obviously your face, but also like a ton of DNA in your mouth. Same with like your teeth are super like um, identif- identifiable.
Identifiable. Yeah.
So yeah, like without the head, and with these people being wherever they were for so long, it's made the identifications really difficult to figure out. Again, like only two victims, I believe, were identified, while like at least 10 of them were not. Which I do wonder now because I know that they like looked back on it in 2024 to see if like like uh, some other people were actually identified, but again, majority of them were not, and that has a big part to do with the heads not being found and
Yeah.
these people being like, we even know like whenever we're in the water for too long, like your fingers get all pruny and stuff. So like imagine your whole body is like that. Like that's so hard to like figure out who someone is based on that. So a big thing I think that would have been help this case being solved, obviously, is if the heads were found, which clearly was the whole point of this murder, to not have the heads being found. But yeah,
Yeah. And I
difficult.
think definitely a huge point of it now is like going back to the identification piece where it's like this happened so long ago and unfortunately like it's almost if you think about it we're getting near like it's 90ish years old of a
Yeah.
case. Um, and there's this idea, I think it's like, well, the murderer is probably dead at this point. Like, there's not a lot of evidence from when that was around.
Hmm.
And there's kind of like this, what are we going to identify at this point in time?
I also
So,
think it's huge that the killings stopped, obviously. Like,
yeah,
if they continued on, like, years down the road, clearly, I think at least eventually someone would have been caught. But I think it's a big thing that it stopped. And like you said, this did happen 90 years ago. So the victims' families likely are all passed away. Same with obviously the killer. So I don't know. I hope that there's some type of justice in the end for at least like down the line. But again,
yeah,
we don't know who it is, so it's really hard to, do that. But I don't know. Hard. But we thought that this one was kind of interesting because of like, we liked. We like learning about serial killers.
it is very
And
interesting. Like, this was
yeah.
a very obscure one, and it's one of
Hmm.
those unknowns that not a lot of people talk about. So it's cool
Yeah.
to be able to not only for ourselves know and like educate our listeners on it, but it definitely is a fascinating one for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's so strange. Ugh,
Serial killers, man.
I know.
Don't be a
If
serial killer, kids.
if anyone like heard us talking about this out of context, like my neighbors are probably like, "What is this girl talking about?"
It's okay. My parents are probably like, hello? Who are you talking about? Decapitations in there?
Yeah, literally. Ugh. But we appreciate you guys listening to another episode. We can't believe this is episode 9.
I know, we're almost on to episode 10, double
Oh my
digit.
gosh, I know. We appreciate you guys listening. Please comment below anyone that you want us to talk about. We have a few lined up that we think will be interesting for you guys, but we appreciate all the comments and everything. So check out our, obviously, YouTube, Spotify, TikTok. We post some fun things on there. Megan
Those ones are
posted some funny
always
ones while I
really
was
fun.
away.
Yeah, I'm actually the most hilarious person ever. Everyone needs to get on my level. I hate myself.
So funny. But we appreciate you guys listening, and we will see you next week.
Yes, have a
Yay!
good one. Goodbye.